All right. We call this meeting to order, and I'd like to have a motion to go into executive session to discuss the superintendent's contract and negotiation updates with the RHA Teachers Chapter and Coalition Unit. Motion by Nikki, a second by Jennifer. All in favor? Aye. Motion's carried. We're in executive session. All right, I'd like to call this meeting back to order, and if you are willing and able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start with some introductions. Good evening, I'm Don McBride, Board President. To my right.
Good evening, Anne-Marie Straczynski, Board Vice President.
Hi, everyone. Karen Flanagan, School District Clerk.
Good evening, Jennifer Laird, Board Member.
Hello, May Abdullah, Board Member.
Good evening, Nelana Sam, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Hi, Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction.
Good evening, Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources.
Hello, James O'Brien, Board Member.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, Board Member.
George Day Marteau, Attorney for the District.
Good evening, Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
Thank you. Brings us to agenda review. Are there any additions or changes to our agenda? All right, seeing none, are there any announcements for this evening? And yes, I just did change my mask because people were having a hard time hearing me, so I put a little thinner one on that you might be able to hear me. Normally, we would have a report from our student representatives, but both of them could not be here this evening, so I'm sure they'll be here the next one to report out. This brings us to our public forum. This is where the audience can address the board on items that are of interest that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak regarding an item that is on the agenda, we're going to wait till we get to that item, and we'll have you raise your hand at the appropriate time. We ask you to please keep your comments at 3 minutes, so we have a very, very full agenda tonight, lots of items to get to. I do have 2 cards here. The first card I have is Blake Smith. If you would come up, Blake, to the microphone right here in the center, state your name and address for the record.
Yes, hello, my name's Blake Smith. I live on Scottsville Road in Rush. I just was doing some research about the rolling averages and 7-day percentages of infection, and I was kind of startled at the rising levels of them. And I did want to mention, I don't want to get into it too heavily, but there was a lawsuit involving many of the Monroe County school districts that, excuse me, was not heard on March 16th. The judge had recused himself. It was heard again on April 5th, and the judge has not spoken to anyone yet about it. But I see the levels and the 7-day averages have been going up and up and up from 112 on the 16th, and now it's 226, 222 on the last 2 days, which is 2.93%. And I guess I really wasn't clear at what percentages or what levels that the school district is looking at to be able to bring back our kids from 6 to 12 in full 5-day classes, or at least 4-day classes. And that's all I really wanted to mention. I'm very concerned about that. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your sharing. I think we may be getting into that a little later into our meeting regarding those numbers. So stay tuned. Next up is David Stevenson.
I, Dave Stevenson, Rush-Henrietta Care. The Rush-Henrietta School District needs to take down all its number one school district in Monroe County signs. We would not want taxpayers to have to pay for the lawsuits for false advertising. Rush-Henrietta has only 4 days per week in-person education for grades K through 6. The needs of junior and senior high school students were ignored. The Hilton School District has reopened for in-person instruction 5 days per week for pre-K to 6th grades. West Irondequoit has a full 5 days in-person education for K through 6 students. The Pittsford School District has 4.5 days per week in-person education for grades K through 5. The Brighton School District has 5 days of in-person instruction for K through 5 students. In Fairport, grades K through 6 have returned to school full-time 5 days per week on April 19th. But Rush-Henrietta has only 4 days per week in-person education for grades K through 6. I would request that you address this promptly and get the students back to in-person education 5 days per week. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else that would like to speak during the public forum on items that are not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll move on with our agenda to consent agenda items for routine matters. It's the action pertaining to awards and rejections of bids, payment of refund of taxes due to order and judgment, action pertaining to another refund of taxes due to order and judgment, approval of emergency application of herbicides, the CSC, CPSC, Arts Alive Scholarship recommendation, approval of a donation, and board meeting minutes for March 23rd, 21. I believe J is not there, which is the 4/13 meeting, so we'll take J off. So that would be items A through I. Take a motion to approve. I have May, and then we have Nikki. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Personnel actions are next. I'll take a motion to approve. I have Anne Marie. I have Mrs. Laird, Jennifer. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. This brings us to the Good Shepherd, item 9. This is an action pertaining to the approval of the purchase agreement with the town of Henrietta for the sale of the Good Shepherd Church and Farmhouse. Any discussion? I'll take a motion. I have May and Jennifer. No discussion? Everybody has their questions answered? All right. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Next up is the action pertaining to the authorization of a parking agreement letter to be sent to the town of Henrietta. I'll take a motion to accept. Anne Marie? Nikki? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. This brings us to our workshop on our capital plan. I'm going to remind folks in the audience that in our workshops, we'd like to remind you that the presenters are going to share their workshop information. The board then will have their opportunity to have dialogue and ask questions. Once the board is finished, we will then entertain questions or comments from the floor. Any of your questions or comments should be directed to the board rather than to a staff member. And then when we get to that point where we're able to have your input, you can raise your hand and we'll call for you to come to the microphone. Thank you. And it looks like we're setting up. And do you want to say anything?
Yeah, before Andy and Ken and Dave start, I just want to provide a little context. As you know, we present the specifics around our capital improvement planning on an annual basis. The items that find themselves in that plan are based on our building needs survey. Prior to the pandemic, we were having conversations around proposing some bigger projects related to the Good Shepherd property, but also enhancements with our athletic fields and some enhancements that would support the arts as well. But given the uncertainty that existed in terms of what our financial situation was going to look like at the start of the pandemic, we felt it best to table those projects and the discussions around them until we had more certainty around what the scenario was going to be with the state's finances and in turn our own finances as a school district. So while we've continued to do more maintenance-based routine projects, we think that the time is right to revisit those conversations around the possibility of considering some larger capital enhancements. So the team here is going to be walking you through some of the specifics, some possible options for our district, and we are not looking for you to make any decisions tonight. However, we will be asking to get some feedback from you related to the direction that you want us to go in terms of our planning. So having said that, I'll turn things over to our team here.
All right, thank you. Typically, this is the Ken Nelson show, and Ken Nelson is our Director of Facilities, and David Kay, who is our District Architect, and they take you through our proposed 3-year capital improvement plan and our 5-year outlook, which is, as the superintendent mentioned, is based upon our building condition survey. We will do that tonight as well, because that does need to be approved by the board every year. It's based upon the building condition survey and our annual meetings with each principal and a review at each building about their needs. But before we get there, we wanted to tee up, as the superintendent mentioned, there was going to be a proposition a year ago at our budget vote for high school artificial turf and a connector road from Good Shepherd. We pulled it when the pandemic hit and finances became uncertain. We did not put it on this year's May budget vote because when that was being compiled, our finances were still very uncertain. Since then, they have firmed up. As you know, the state budget has been finalized. We do have money set aside. It was set aside for this project, so that money is still there. And we think we're in good shape with next year's budget, so it's time for the board to reconsider or to look at it again to see if it's something they'd like to consider. It's too late to put on the May budget vote, but certainly we could do a December or February vote or next May. And the other thing we need to look at is our Good Shepherd facility. The original Good Shepherd School, as you know, we have a lot of community programs there. The building is in dire need of repair. When the Perrys owned it, they did not have the finances to do a lot of upkeep on it, so it's been band-aided. So there does need to be work done pretty imminently. So that's on tonight's proposal, but tied into that is our Webster building. As you know, we lease out half of this building that we're in tonight to BOCES, which help pay for the Good Shepherd facility. That lease expires next summer, and at the same time, BOCES has their Bird Morgan School in East Rochester, which lease expires in June of '24. So they would love to expand. They've expressed interest to see if there's a way to lease this entire building, or at a minimum, they'd like to continue leasing the half that they have. So we're going to need some direction from the board about Good Shepherd, the Good Shepherd site, because it does tie into some of the programs here. So we're going to give you some options for you to start considering. This is a longer term strategic thinking, so certainly no decisions on that tonight, but it's something that needs to be on your radar because of potential opportunities with BOCES down the road. So with that, we'll start with the high school turf. And a lot of this is just refresher. We canceled the project vote due to the pandemic last May, but what was proposed, artificial turf field at the high school, which would be multi-purpose, used for games and practice. Also new tennis courts, because the existing tennis courts at the high school are unplayable. They've deteriorated so much. And it would relocate the softball diamond to where the current practice soccer field is. And it also talked about adding a connector road from the Good Shepherd site on East Henrietta into the west parking lot, with the hope that it could be used not only for access for the stadium when sports are being played, but also possibly to relieve congestion in the morning drop-off every day at the high school. So that was added to the project. The reason for artificial turf, we could have outdoor PE classes throughout the year, or at least as long as there's no snow on the field. It'd be a practice field for lacrosse, soccer, and football. Right now, we have a great turf field, real turf in the football stadium, but you can't practice on it because it would cause so much damage, it wouldn't make it playable on game days. So it's a great game field, but it's not really a good practice field. Whereas artificial turf could be used for lots of different sports. It could be even used for infield practice for baseball and softball. So we have 15 athletic teams with over 360 students who would be using it, as well as we could lease it out to community sports. As you know, we have a great relationship with the town of Henrietta, and their rec program does run activities that they use our facilities, so this would give them another option, and their kids who are our kids as well. And if the board desired, we could put lighting and some stadium seating in it, since it could be varsity lacrosse. And the biggest thing about lighting is the practice. It would enable early in the season or late in the fall practices to go beyond 4 or 4:30 when it gets dark in that point of the season, so it'd get a lot more use. The question is, why do we need it when we have the best grass fields in Monroe County? We just explained some of that. The real grass fields do not stand up to the practice as well as the game, even though they are preferable for playing games. But the big thing is also the extended, what our David calls our shoulder season, early in the spring or later in the fall when the grass is dormant. We can't use those fields, and so our teams are going off-site often. We lose a lot of home games due to the field conditions. We have less practice because other fields do have artificial turf with lights, so they're getting full practices in from the beginning of the season. And a great example of the impact was when the pandemic hit and it condensed our sports season. Our teams were going to Pittsford. Pittsford was very generous, allowed us to use their artificial turf, but we had to bus them over there and share the field. So it did demonstrate the need that we have. And it would give us an extended PE season, could be used year-round. And also lacrosse games with track and field meets tend to conflict, so lacrosse would probably be played solely on the artificial turf. It tends to be a better surface for lacrosse. So what does this mean? This layout is the existing layout. So you can see the tennis courts at the south end of the west parking lot. And right behind them, S4 is currently a practice field. Football's there. S2 on the west side of the parking lot is a JV softball diamond. And then S11 behind the new turf field that we did for soccer is currently a practice soccer field. What the proposal would do is move the tennis courts to where the JV soccer is. So the tennis courts would move to the west side of the parking lot, which would enable us to put a artificial turf field, a north-south orientation, so you don't have as much impact as the east-west orientation on the existing practice field. And we could move the existing JV softball back to S11 because now the soccer teams can use the artificial turf for practice. They wouldn't need S11. And you can see also there's the connector road that would come from East Henrietta Road through our Good Shepherd property behind the stadium and into the west parking lot. So it would be a great tool for alleviating some of our traffic jams that we have every morning and afternoon for school arrival and dismissal. Ignore the dollars in the top left corner. This was from when we did the plan a year ago, and there have been some changes. So ignore those dollars. Here's what we would propose is an $8 million project. So the connector road would be about $2.6 million. The small sports field behind the Good Shepherd would be fixed up and made playable. It wouldn't be a full-size soccer field, but certainly smaller for the younger kids. Eventually, we'd like to raise the parish office. Right now, the diocese has use of it through June of '22, but eventually we'd like to raise that to either make it a green space or maybe put a connector parking lot there. And then the artificial turf itself and tennis course at Sperry, about $4.7 million. And that amount of money does give us allowance for some stadium seating if you'd like, and lights if it's something the board desired. And you can see most of this is eligible for state aid because it's connected to the high school. The one thing about the Good Shepherd building, it is not eligible for any state aid. The state doesn't recognize it as we have enough space in our current elementary schools per the state guidelines that they will not aid another building, just like this Webster building, they will not aid because we have enough space at our high school. And that's something to keep in the back of your mind. But we have the $8 million set aside. It could be paid for with cash, and then over the next 15 years, we'd receive the building aid of about $4.6 million spread over 15 years. So any questions on artificial turf?
What would be like the yearly maintenance? Do we have like a ballpark?
I think I'll let Ken or David answer that. Is it pretty similar?
Yearly maintenance?
Yeah, the annual maintenance on artificial turf. Would it be similar to a grass field?
There's a lot of fluffing that they do to the field to keep the granules up in the grass. So there's some equipment required to fluff the field. They run over it with a large magnet to try to get if anything falls into the field that's metal, to draw that out. That's the most knowledge I have right now about, as far as taking care of a field. I'll get you some more information if you'd like later.
Yeah, I think what our grounds crew said, it's different maintenance than
Right.
grass, but it's not more or less, it's different.
Okay.
And actually, the grounds crew just purchased a GPS line machine, so they could quickly redraw lines on the artificial turf if they wanted. Usually to draw field lines, it's 2 guys, 3 to 4 hours. With this machine, it's 1 person, 45 minutes, so it could be used. But like David said, you need some equipment to fluff and probably sanitize. You don't need to mow it or water it, but there is different maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Having come from a district where we had turf, Jennifer, the maintenance is comparable in terms of the amount of effort that you have to put into it, and we found the cost to be pretty comparable as well. We didn't call it fluffing, we called it grooming, but we can call it fluffing in RH, there's no issue.
So what is the life expectancy of that turf?
From my knowledge, most turf fields have a life of 12 to 15 years. And then it's time to replace the carpet. The drainage system and a lot of the major expenses that are there remain, and you roll up the carpet and replace it with a new one.
That'd still be roughly $1 million project, wouldn't it?
When you do it in today's dollars, yeah.
Yeah,
How much? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
about $1 million. So it'd be 12 to 15 years, about $1 million to redo it in today's cost. Clearly, the lighting, the stadium seating, the drainage is there.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody have any other questions specifically about the turf? Because I think he has more to present.
Yes. All right. As you can see on the picture here, this is the existing Good Shepherd site. On the far right are the two buildings that we're in the process of selling to the town of Henrietta. They've identified a lot more community uses for them than we would be able to use, so it's a great for the community, and it takes the liability off the school district of having to maintain and improve those buildings, and it'll allow our community members access to them through town programs. And but the big thing is the school building itself. It was built in the 50s, and it hasn't been well maintained the last few decades, so a lot of work needs to be done. So we have a few different options for you to consider. One option is what we're calling a minor renovation of the existing building, and if we don't do anything else, this is pretty much a must-have. That'd be $4,355,000. And you can see there is some building aid, and that's for the parking lot piece of the project. But the building itself is not aidable. The other thing we could consider is raising the building and then building a new building to replace it. And that new building could be located closer to East Henrietta Road to give us space for an varsity athletic field behind it. At $18.5 million, it was pretty prohibitive. But as you know, this is a crisis where we might have a little opportunity. We have about $12.5 million of federal stimulus money allocated to us that's recommended to be spent on non-recurring costs. So certainly a lot of that is going to learning recovery and helping transition the kids back. But we could probably free up about $8 million of that over the next 4 years to allocate towards this building. So with existing capital funds and $8 million from the stimulus money, all of a sudden something that really looked impossible could be a possibility. The mechanics would be a little tough. We'd still have to put it up to the voters and ask for bond approval because we don't have the money in hand technically. Our stimulus money has to be spent over 4 years. We can't build it all at once. But then we could use that stimulus money for some of our current programs to free up money to be directed into capital. So if you talk to my gentlemen on the left and right, I think that's their preferred option because there are just so many things that are not great about the existing building. That's what they would certainly look, and it gives us more options, but it's very expensive. But we thought we'd throw it out there because it's a long shot, but not an impossible shot. And then the last thing is to raise the existing Good Shepherd School building and move those programs to this building here. And the beauty about that, right now we have 2 significant buildings for our student activities that are not aidable. This would put them all into one building that's not aidable. And then we would use that site for a varsity baseball field, an artificial turf baseball field, which would actually could be used for more sports than baseball, but it would be large enough for baseball. And then the last thing we talked about, we do have the artificial turf project. So right now, we have about $19 million in capital funds available for the board to consider using. So all of these projects are in the realm of possibility. A little bit more, or any questions on the options before I get into the detail?
Can I ask, If we were to continue renting to BOCES, we would then be able to use the rent money to help supplement any addition, building, whatever projects we decide to do, we could use it for that.
Exactly, right. Right now, we get about, well, we have a little over $500,000 in a rental, but some of that pays for the maintenance.
Sure.
We provide the custodians, but we get about $350,000 rent just for the facility. And that's what we use that annual stream to help fund the purchase of Good Shepherd. So certainly that would be available ongoing to do things. And if you built a new building and relocated some programs and freed up this whole building, you could certainly lease this whole building for a lot more than that. And we could make BOCES responsible for capital improvements. So that way they would be eligible for aid because their students would generate eligibility. So it'd be a win-win, which is one of the reasons why we put option 2 on there. It's, you know, there are some definite benefits with the synergy with what we could do with this building.
So if we relocate some of the programs here, would we transfer the students from here back to the high school, or?
There's 2 options. One is certainly at the high school. When we did the major renovations there, as you know, the second floor over the main office was designed to house an alternative high school, and that way it gives those students much better access to high school activities and courses, but still gives them a segregated area. Or we have coexisted some of the community programs at Good Shepherd, as you know, for a year during the reconfiguration construction. The alternative high school was at the existing Good Shepherd school. So there's a possibility of co-locating them with some of our community programs in that building. So it does make it a little bit closer to the high school, but it's still a separate building. So there's a couple of different options for the board to consider longer term. I mean, the challenge with the second one, it really squeezes the community programs, but it is probably doable. So we could locate, co-locate the 2 different programs. And for years, they coexisted in the Vollmer building. One wing was the older, the alternative high school age kids, and then the other was for the community programs for the young kids. All right, any other questions? So option 1, we would need the playground would be updated. Because of the connector road, we would need a new playground there. The sports field behind the existing building, about $2.9 million of renovation to the existing school building. And when we get into the 3-year capital improvement plan, David will take you in detail what that $2.9 million gets us, plus parking lot improvements. It needs a lot of if nothing else, a lot of repaving over there. So this project, option 1, would cost about $4.3 million. So as I mentioned, we have about $19 million in capital funds available. If we use $8 million for the high school turf, if you decided to move forward with that, that gives us $11 million left. So this would be funded with cash as well, so no impact to our local taxpayers. Option 2 is raising the existing building and building a new pre-K building. So we would still need a playground and parking lot improvements, but what that could look like, and this was an original drawing from a year ago before we decided to sell the church to the town, so this will be revised, but this gives you a concept. Conceptually, if we put the building closer to East Henrietta Road, we'd have room behind it for a varsity baseball field, which you know current varsity baseball is at Roth, so it's not at the high school site. Right now, though, the dollars in this $18.5 million does not include the artificial turf baseball field. That would have to be a separate later project, but it makes a space available. So when you look at this, concentrate on the building piece of it. There'd be a building closer to the road, but because we are selling the church building to the town, we'd be about 30 feet back from where this building is. It'll be a little bit differently oriented. And then option 3 is to demolish the existing building and move the existing programs to this building. And we could do one of two. Well, the cost of it, we would have the funding available to do the artificial turf baseball diamond, which would be actually multi-purpose. It'd be about $1.7 million to tear down the existing church and redo all the parking, and about $2.8 million for renovations at the Webster School to accommodate the younger children that would be in this program. And you could do that would give you a couple of options with this building. Either the current community programs could move into this space and our alternative program could go to the high school, or when the lease with BOCES is up next year, you could ask them to vacate and we could use this whole building and keep our alternative program here and the kids, but then you lose the revenue stream from the BOCES lease and the whole building becomes non-aidable for any capital improvements. But this does provide a few options. So this would get all the varsity sports back onto the high school complex. We'd finally have the tennis courts if the artificial turf project is approved, and then we could bring baseball back as well. And what this would look like, you can see there, we'd have the new baseball diamond, and we could also put on a soccer/lacrosse field could be accommodated on it as well. There'd be parking and a small concession/restroom facility for the field. And you can see some of the unique parking on the connector road, especially behind the stadium. It allows for a drop-off lane and some parking behind the football stadium, which we could do this option for that behind the stadium. We could look at that of any of the options. That isn't unique to this option. And then the other things that we have not included in any of our projections, but we need to keep our eye on, the secondary auditoriums would all benefit greatly from LED lighting. For about $2.5 million, we could upgrade the lighting, so for plays, musicals, whatever, it just provides a lot more versatility when they have the productions. And some upgrading of sound systems. Some are pretty newer, but with the constant, especially student use of the soundboards, there needs to be some upgrading of them, because each one of them at one time or another seems to have a problem with it. And then we have to keep an eye on our high school pool. The tank is the original tank that was built when the high school was built in the 60s, and we did spring some leaks in it this year. So for $2.5 million, we could fix the leaks and refresh the whole interior of it to make it look a lot newer. We could brighten it up, put in new tiling, LED lighting. So that's something to keep on your radar as well. But if we don't do that, at a minimum, we need to fix the leaks. So when David does the 3-year capital improvement plan, you'll see there's funding in there to at least fix the leaks, so we can extend the life of the pool. Because a new pool is in the $25 million range. They're not cheap. So we certainly want to extend this as long as we can. So we don't need decisions on any of these tonight, but you know, strategically we will need you to think and consider some of these options, especially The lease for this building with BOCES, we're going to have to give them some direction in the next 3 or 4 months. If we have an interest in leasing the whole building, they would need to know that for their plans. But if we're not going to renew the lease for the half that they're in, they need to know that as well. So there's a little bit over a year left in the lease that expires in August of '22, so we should give them at least a year notice about our intentions to allow them to plan accordingly. So, the last thing is just a timeline for the artificial turf. If we did have if the board desired a December vote on it and put it up for capital proposition between the designing phase, construction documents, the state education department review, we think the field could be completed by December of '23, so you could start your spring season in the 22-23 school year on the artificial turf field. And then if the board were interested in a new building at the Good Shepherd site, tearing down and putting up a new building, that'd be, for that piece of the project, add at least another 8 to 12 months to that timeline before the new building would be ready. So next steps, sometime over the board will have to consider the artificial turf and whether or not to move forward with it. The Good Shepherd options, as we talked about, there are a number of options, but at some point in the next 3 or 4 months, we should indicate to BOCES what our intent is. We could do a thought exchange for some of the more expensive options to get community input to see if they would support it, and then determine whether we use some of the federal stimulus funds to help fund a new building if that was the desire of the board. So, and then the board, you could do lots of things. One option is to have in December or February a vote and put up 2 propositions, one for the artificial turf, one for whatever direction you decide on Good Shepherd, or certainly we could delay the Good Shepherd till a later point. But if we are going to delay the Good Shepherd, we should start doing some of the interior renovations that David will talk about in a minute. So, any questions? A lot to digest, but at least it'll get you to start thinking about it.
Under option 2, you have a picture of what a layout could look like. I vaguely remember that we had other options of building design. Would that be still an option to us? What if we said, a varsity baseball field right in that spot wasn't really the best place? Would we have some options to look at?
Yeah, I think that could be massaged quite a bit.
I'm sorry?
I think any of the options could be massaged quite a bit as far as the layout on the field and the layout of the building.
Okay.
There was a lot of assumptions made when this was done that have changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly if the board would like, any option you'd like, start to think about it and let us know, and then we can have the architects, if you're serious about them, draw the different layouts for what they would look like, similar to what they did here.
I think for tonight's purposes, what we'd like to get you thinking about, questioning, commenting on, are sort of the general concepts. Do we do minimal renovation in the existing space? Do we raise that building, or do we raise it and rebuild it, which is the most expensive option? But if as a board you chose that option to raise it and then rebuild it, then to Dave's point, then we could look at specifically how you want to set it up, what you would want
Gotcha.
to include, what type of field you'd want there. But I think for tonight's purposes, we're just trying to get a sense of your thinking around the enhancements for athletics and the arts, but then also we do have to start thinking about what we want to do programmatically, and then how that impacts how we're utilizing some of these physical spaces, like here in this building and out at the Good Shepherd site.
Thoughts? Some people deep in thought.
It's a lot to digest, as Andy said.
Well, I am going to say that it has become extremely evident that we need to do something about our fields. This COVID really made us aware that, football now playing, and they couldn't play on their own or practice. So it's really obvious that we need to do something about that. And I'm going to be bold because everybody else is still thinking. There's a part of me that hates to put a lot of money into a really old building that's just going to keep needing a lot of work. So personally, not thinking about dollars right now, because I still may have sticker shock and go, ew. I'm kind of leaning towards demolishing the old school, rebuilding the new pre-K, and getting our turf fields in and set up with that access road. It's speaking to me. I just hate throwing money into an old building that you're just gonna, it needs a lot of work over there. That's just my thought. Anybody else want to share their thoughts?
I really like I always like the master plan for one, but I would want to tweak the road, the access road, because like you said, we could use the turf and we could also have simultaneously use the football fields. So to be able to have the access where you could have buses come in, I think that was in that was in the later drawing.
Yes.
I really liked that because I think that would alleviate some of the congestion. Because let's face it, that parking lot's a nightmare, okay? If you ever tried to drop off your child or pick them up, it's crazy. And I don't think our varsity tennis players play at the high school, correct? Because of
Not right.
So, I think that's a no-brainer. And I don't know if this is just the teacher in me, but we always look at the CSC recommendations, and we have a lot of children that are now getting labeled autistic. And would it be something that we could put, if we get rid of the Good Shepherd? I know the pre-K loves it there, and I know it works well. It's a small place. Would it be possible to do a pre-K and maybe some kind of autism center? Because we send a lot of our children out for placement. Is that something where it would be aidable, because we would be using it for children with diagnosis or special needs? So not only would we have a new autism building, but we could also have something for the pre-K. Or, even getting crazier, let's face it, mental health. Let's go wish list. Mental health. Let's face it, mental health. We were giving stepping stone, I always forget.
Healing
Healing Connections. We're giving Healing Connections a space. Wouldn't it be nice if Healing Connections maybe had a place to actually do work from? That's also, I don't know if that's aidable or if that makes it more aidable or what, but
my
that's
hunch
just.
is it would not be aidable, but David, you have a better.
Yeah, in my experience, it would not be aidable, and I would throw it back to Andy and say that I know there is not deferred cost, but there's cost savings from whenever we keep a program in-house, but I don't know what that would be. But the building would probably still not be aidable.
Okay.
It just needs to house our K through 12 students in order to be aidable.
Yeah, the state looks at our existing
Right,
school
our existing
building
space,
and
yeah.
says we could house.
But having if we use this if we rented this out to BOCES full-time, then we would have income coming in.
Yep,
That would make it a little bit more
exactly,
appealing.
yes.
I think I'd like to hear community input on this.
Yep.
I would
Yes.
really like to hear what community wants. I think they kind of want a turf field. That's just my guess. So I think that would be great to hear, and I think also that, what they want to do with the Good Shepherd. That would be my wish list, or my proposal.
Especially seeing things have changed that we've now sold to the town, the church building and the farmhouse. So some of our thoughts on how we were going to use that has changed. So it would be a good time to reach back out and get feedback. Anybody over here?
I'm in favor of going as comprehensive and strategic as possible with this. And I lettered in cross-country for Rush-Henrietta. Now, we didn't mind running around in the mud, but I understand that that's not ideal for all sports. So, I would like to see our spring teams have the capability to practice as they need to. I would like to see our varsity baseball team come home to the high school. I would like to see our varsity tennis team come home to the high school. And so, whatever way we go, I think we need to think with as long of a timeline as possible and as comprehensively and strategically as possible on this. That's just kind of my overall thought. But I think community input has to be a component of that.
He took what I was
Follow
going to say,
James'
that is the
point.
strategic plan.
I'm sorry.
Nope, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just to follow up on James' point, my mind just went to when you mentioned we might be thinking about relocating students from the alternative school back to the high school, because I know there's mental health and behavioral issues, and I would just worry relocating them back there would be an issue. So I would really cautious us from making that decision without, I'm all for giving them access to programs at the high school or equipment or whatever, but I know this has been a good place for them, and I just want us to think twice before we decide to ship them somewhere else. Other than that, all the options look good, but the money is the deciding factor.
So if we're hearing you correctly, related to Good Shepherd and some of the things that are being proposed to enhance our fields and some potential arts projects down the line, it sounds like, generally speaking, you are supportive, but you want to get community feedback. And so our next steps would be to look at how we may go about getting more community input. And then we'll circle back around and present to the board at a later date.
Now,
I like the thought exchange that we did last year,
Yep.
or not, it was like before COVID, I like the thought exchange, and then we also did, I think you presented in the evening.
It was a community
Yeah.
I
forum.
thought that was really good and to get a lot of input.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked that option too.
Okay.
before we move on to the 3 and 5 year, I have a handout in the audience, so I'm going to address that at this point, and then we'll move on to the 3 and 5 year project plan.
Hi, Shiloh Earthman, co-president of Boosters, St. Patrick Drive. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on behalf of the RH Sports Boosters. We're excited to hear that you'll begin rediscussing options for athletic facility upgrades at the senior high school. To be clear, our interest in this project has not wavered. We understood why it was removed from last year's budget vote due to the uncertainty of the pandemic. During this time period, many of us respectfully sat back as observers, monitoring board decisions, budget processes, and aid allocation, and are pleased to see the district may now be in a place to move forward. Pivoting has been critical during this time period. Most would argue will remain necessary. As you plan for this artificial turf project, please consider the most functional and practical approach, one that would provide the flexibility to maximize and extend use for the student body, student athletes, and the community. Lighting is a critical element to providing this flexibility, and if put in place, could serve to simplify extracurricular planning and positively impact school and community spirit. We are confident that you, as administrators and members of the Board of Education, will make fiscally responsible and sound decisions in regards to the athletic facilities upgrade that will pave the way for a completed project in 2023. Time is of the essence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Rachel Sherman at 15 Glenacre in Henrietta. That was a great comment from the sports boosters. And so my question of the board is just, how will you know that the relevant stakeholders have really had the opportunity to provide input. You are looking to do a lot of things at once. Mr. O'Brien's comment about being strategic is a great one. And to do a bunch of things at once, you have to make sure that you're not losing sight of the needs of the students, especially the ones who are traditionally marginalized. And I do think about the alternative high school folks. I do think about the preschool program. Both of those are centerpieces to the district's equity initiative. And when you're talking about relocating and you're talking about sort of the use of those spaces, form follows function. So I would love to be aware of what processes are in place to get input from the alternative high school families, the alternative high school teachers, the UPK families, UPK teachers, and then, of course, the PE teachers and the sports families and students. So it has been a while since, these options were worked up, and it could be that there are other options that should be on the table. When I was talking to my husband, for example, who's much more a sports guy than me, he said, well, why isn't soccer, lacrosse, and football sharing an artificial turf field? You have the concession stand, you have the bleachers, you should put lights there. He's familiar with districts who have done things that way. And of course I say, well, I have no idea, I don't know. But I just would want to make sure that the highest and best use is happening across all of the sports fields that are being upgraded. So I think more opportunities for focus groups, for surveys. I understand the use of the thought exchange, but it definitely has some drawbacks. But talking with people one-on-one, in groups, the teachers and others, I would encourage you to explore those options as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience at this point? We're going to make it quickly because we do need to get on to the next portion of the capital projects review.
Hi, Millie Safranek, 711 Pinnacle Road. I was just going to suggest that, kind of echoing Rachel Sherman's comment, that you include the youth in collecting the feedback. I know in the Rochester City School District that they held a couple of youth forums, particularly with high school students, in order to get feedback from them as to what it is that they are prioritizing. I think that's particularly important when you're talking about the needs of the alternative high school.
Thank you. Just jotting down a couple of notes, that's why I wasn't looking right at your face.
Carolyn Lewis, 105 Thunder Ridge Drive in Rush. I too have a concern regarding how we will get input from a programmatic standpoint, because after reviewing the materials, there's not a lot of information regarding the pool. And as I think many of you would know, that the impact of swimming regarding the impact of swimming, many of the neighboring districts are able to include swimming at the middle school level to ensure that children learn to swim. Also, the impact of swimming for students, current students across the spectrum with physical and learning disabilities, as well as mental wellness. So I hope that as we take a look at this, that there's a way to include other aspects from a programming standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, again, just writing some notes. All right. Then I will turn the floor back over to the gentleman at the tables.
All right, and at this point, I'll turn it over to David Kay, our district architect, and Ken Nelson, our director of facilities, to take you through our 3-year plan.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks for having us in to discuss the 3- and 5-year plans. I'd like to start off by saying how much we always appreciate the board's support in our facilities. The Board of Education has been very supportive over the years, and we truly thank you for it.
David, excuse me, can you pull that microphone just a little closer? Thank you.
Is that a little better?
Thank you.
So we are here to request the board to accept our 5-year plan, and I would like to just send you to page 2 of the 5-year plan. And that's just for why we are here. On page 2 of the plan, in the first paragraph, we reference section 155.1 of the regulation of the Commissioner of Education. And part of this regulation is to have a 5-year capital improvement plan. And any project that we send up to SED, they just look for these two documents to mesh. When you look through the plan, you'll see that we use 3 X's to indicate the year we plan to do the work. We also use 3 C's for energy conservation measures, and sometimes 3 R's if a staff member requested some work. The plan is then broken down by building, and this is followed by district-wide projects and long-range programs. We use a vertical dashed line to delineate work, and any work to the left of the dashed line is very likely to occur, and work to the right of the dashed line is desirable, but unfunded and less likely to occur. When you go through the document, any work that's listed under the 2021 year is pending approval by SED right now, and hopefully we'll get approval next week. We are waiting. And all of the work listed under years 2022 and 23 in red are funded via budgetary appropriation, and the green funding is a proposed referendum that, some of which Andy referred to in a proposition. So starting out with this single sheet, which is a 3-year plan. For in 2021, our focus is going to be on Roth and the senior high school. At Roth, we will be replacing a 1993 installed roof, replacing the steam boilers, adding a electronic marquee sign at the entrance, renovating the library, foyer, and bookstore area, and some extensive locker renovations, which include paint, lighting, lockers, skylights, and gender-neutral changing rooms, which we all know from being there, it's long over needed. And then we'll also be replacing an emergency generator at Roth. At Sperry, we'll be replacing boilers, a 1994 roof and skylights, replacing some auditorium lighting controls, painting the Gordon Stadium bleacher steel, and also replacing an emergency generator. Then in 2022 at File, going over a column, we'll be replacing the emergency generator, another PA clock notification system, and then some selected classroom and bathroom upgrades. At Balmer, we have a 1993 built-up roof that we're looking to resaturate, which, we're just going to leave the existing roof in place and, revive it. And by doing that, we get a 10-year warranty out of that. And over in the last column, moving at Burger, we'll be replacing a PA clock notification system, some bathroom upgrades in the E-wing, and we need to remove an old oil day tank and an old oil boiler that we just have never used, and replace the auditorium soundboard. And moving to Good Shepherd, addressing several needs. If we are to keep the building, we need to replace the fire alarm system, replace the roof, box out the parking lot, ADA bathroom upgrades, finish the ceilings in the corridors, and abate the corridor and install new flooring in the corridor. And then along with that, we do some LED lighting and replace some selected windows. And lastly, at Sperry, we're planning for repairs to the concrete pool tank, I think regardless of what happens, and regrading the sports turf fields at S7 and S8 to drain better. And I don't want to go through the 5-year document, it'd be very repetitive, so that's really all we have, and open it up for any questions.
I have a couple questions. Well, actually, probably just one. The Good Shepherd, all the items that you have listed, is that in addition to if we would have renovate the building, or is that the renovations of the building?
That is one of Andy's bullet items. It fits into one of his options.
Option 1.
But if you were to do nothing and you want to keep the building, there's still some real needs that would need to be addressed in a 3-year plan. But it is not additive to Andy's plan.
All right,
That
thank
he
you.
just went over.
Any other questions? All right, there doesn't look like there's any more questions about the 3- and 5-year plans. So at this time, then we take a motion on accepting the 3-year and 5-year capital improvement plan. Nikki and Mrs. Laird, any other discussion regarding the 3- and 5-year plan? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. All right. Thank you for your presentation. We have a lot to think about. I'm
you for
sure
your
we'll be
time.
hearing more from you as we search out some information.
Yep, and thank you for your support. We really appreciate it.
It brings us then to our workshop on our instructional space committee. And we're going to let the changing of the guard at the table happen.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
While they're in transition, I'll just say a couple of things. First and foremost, I'll thank Andy and Ken and Dave for that presentation and all the work they did in preparation and all the work that they do to be thoughtful about the way that we maintain our facilities and the way that we plan for the future of what our campus is going to look like. In respect to this next presentation related to the findings of Space Committee, which were presented to you in the form of the Space Committee's report, which we gave you this winter, I just want to remind you that the general findings were that we're experiencing significant growth on the west side of the district, declining enrollment on the east side of the district, and if you'll remember, you requested a little bit more information about what that looks like, where we're seeing growth, where we're seeing declining enrollment in our schools, and what some possible options are tonight. So I'm going to turn things over to Keena Smith and Dr. Pat McHugh, who will be walking us through the details of the findings and those possible options. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Superintendent Wright. We are going to be in keeping with the theme of facilities and space, following up on the previous report. Tonight what we're going to do is we're going to recap for you some of the key findings and recommendations that were contained in the Space Committee report in January from this past fall, as well as some additional considerations. Then we're going to dive a little more deeply into some of the data that we have, including enrollment projections, as well as other data related to our attendance areas. Then we're going to do an attendance area analysis where we look at some possible changes that could be made should the board decide to go in that direction, and we'll delve into lay out some options for you that you would have available to you to consider if you choose to. So really, to recap what the main finding was of the Space Committee report this year, based on our 5-year enrollment projections that we do every year, based on this year's projections, we do forecast a continued imbalance and a growing imbalance in the population and enrollment between the Berger attendance feeder pattern and the Roth attendance feeder pattern. Some of the potential impact of that reality include a projected shortfall of classroom space at Vollmer. We did describe in the report in January that we do expect Vollmer to be short classrooms in 2023-24, starting in that school year, if current enrollments and projections hold true. We're forecasting a growing enrollment gap between Vollmer and Sherman as sister schools, as well as between Berger and Roth, our two junior high schools. And there were also some concerns expressed by committee members that were reflected in the report about demographic disparities that may be emerging between the two parts of our district, Roth and Berger's feeder patterns. So our options tonight are going to speak to how the board might want to address some of these issues. Just to recap some of the major recommendations of the Space Committee report, they did recommend that the board may want to consider redrawing some elementary attendance areas at either grades K through 9 or grades 4 through 9. And that specifically the last 2 years, as the committee has looked at our various attendance patterns and the growth of residential housing and all the other factors we take into account in making our projections, as they looked at those, they tried to narrow the focus as much as possible and came up with 6 attendance areas that are roughly along the West Henrietta Road I-390 corridor that we're going to speak about this evening. Keena has done a great analysis of the enrollments and attendance in those areas to further give the board more information to work with. You were provided in the packet this evening with a map that shows that area shaded in gray in the middle of the district there, and we did enlarge those maps on the easels tonight for your reference. The other major recommendation that really emerged was for us to do some additional work within the buildings that may be affected by the space crunch and look at ways to perhaps consolidate some room usage to free up some additional classroom space to get us through the years in question where Vollmer and then subsequently Berger may be getting a little bit tight. Other considerations that we discussed were to try to limit, if the board does move in the direction of attendance area changes. You'll remember, of course, that we made major attendance area changes just 5 years ago in the reconfiguration. That if we were going to consider doing that again, that we try to make it as limited in scope as possible. And really, when you look at the 5-year projections, and Keena's going to review those again for you this evening in just a few minutes, when you look at that, just a swing of 200 students or so would make a very significant impact on evening out the numbers between Berger and Roth and between Vollmer and Sherman. They also reminded the board that we should consider an age out option, similar to what we did during the reconfiguration, that if we do decide to change elementary school attendance areas, that we consider allowing students and siblings and so forth to stay put until they age out of that particular level. So if the change happened and my child was in 2nd grade, they could stay in that school till the end of 3rd grade and then switch schools by where they live. They urged us to keep an eye on the impact on transportation from 2 standpoints. One, the district's capacity for transportation, which we know is already under a great amount of stress, but also from the family and student standpoint in watching to make sure that travel times stay reasonable and within the district regulatory guidelines. Certainly, it's a tough sell to parents. This is a touchy subject to begin with, as you all know, and that's an even tougher sell to parents and families when their child is put on a bus and they pass one school that's closer to their neighborhood to get to another. So we want to try, what we've tried to do in laying out potential options for you this evening is to keep it limited in scope. The committee also pointed out the demographic disparities or demographic differences that have emerged between the Roth and Berger areas and the potential issues for equity that presents, especially as a school like Vollmer continues to grow, and yet we haven't adjusted their base allocation of certain staffing, for example, in mental health or in administration or in the number of paraprofessionals or security people that we allocate by building. Those resources are going to become more and more strained as those attendance, as those enrollment numbers continue to diverge. And then one other thing they strongly suggested was that before we make any move in this direction, that parent surveys and stakeholder input be gathered to get their preferences, because there are, as you're going to see, a number of different ways we could go. So at this point, I'm going to, actually, I can just summarize this for you before we turn it over to Keena to delve into some of the further data. This is just a reminder of what you saw in the Space Committee report in January that illustrates for you the differences. The top line is the current enrollment as of Beds Day last October at Sherman, Roth, Vollmer, and Berger. And again, that is putting all the students who live in those attendance areas. If it were a typical year and there was no remote learning program and everybody was in their home school, this would be the enrollments of those schools as of last October. And then the second line shows you what our fifth-year projection in this year's numbers would be. And you can see the changes. Sherman's about flat. Roth is continuing to lose population, but you can see major growth at Vollmer and at Berger. We're right to the point at Vollmer where it would actually become the second largest building in the district after the senior high school. And then you can see those differences that we're projecting. If these projections hold true, by 25-26, the difference in enrollment between the sister schools. And that's where you start to get into those issues of straining resources and overcrowding, et cetera. Given the committee's feedback, we thought it'd be important to delve a little more deeply into the numbers with regard to demographics, because we know that is a concern of the board as well, especially with our commitment to equity and inclusion. So I'm going to ask Keena at this point to delve into those numbers a little more with you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight. So when we looked at the demographic factors, we looked at 5 subgroups. We looked at our free and reduced lunch, which is an indicator of socioeconomic status for our students. And what we found when you look at these 4 buildings, you can see when you compare Sherman and Vollmer, Sherman is about 10% higher than Vollmer, and also when you look at Roth, the difference is even greater between Roth and Berger. So very clearly there's a difference in socioeconomic status when you look at this current year. When you look at students of color, you're seeing some disproportionality, but not a large amount of disproportionality, within 4 percentage points between Sherman, Roth, and then Vollmer and Berger. The other 3 subgroups, students with disabilities, English language learners, and those 2 groups specifically, there really isn't much of a difference between the buildings. There's a lot of equity that you can see in those numbers. So what we chose to do was really take a look a little bit deeper on the free and reduced lunch and the students of color to see what that looks like a little bit more in depth when you start to look at the impact on the attendance areas and how that would impact these 4 buildings.
So, as I said earlier, the committee had studied 6 areas, attendance areas, that fall roughly along the 390 West Henrietta Road corridor. As we all discussed back in the days when we were planning the reconfiguration, one of the factors that we had to consider that made it difficult in some ways to redraw attendance boundaries is that our schools, especially our elementary schools, are really located on the outer ring of the district, where when you look at a map and look at their locations. There's no primary building in the center of the district. So it's almost like spokes on a wheel. And if you're going to change areas, you almost have to do it in a circular fashion, either clockwise or counterclockwise, where you move neighborhoods along. So we thought to address those concerns about transportation and some of the other concerns that were met, as well as balancing some of the demographic information that Keena explained, that we would look at those 6 attendance areas along the middle of the district there that you see shaded on the map. The current enrollment in grades 4 through 9 in those areas is 273. And that's going to be the window of students that's going to directly affect the issue at Balmer.
Do you mind if I turn this easel so folks in the audience can have an idea what we're talking about with a map?
Sure.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
can do that if you want.
No, it's okay. I don't mind doing that.
Thank you.
And as I said, by changing, potentially changing attendance areas in this location, you're going to be able to minimize the impact on transportation without a lot of crisscrossing across the district. Now, you have two other handouts with you in the packet as well that might be helpful as we move through this. Keena is going to describe in a little bit more detail the makeup of the students who attend these various attendance areas.
So the first handout that you're going to see is the bar chart with the table, the number of students, so it looks like this. Just the one on the screen.
It's marked as handout 1.
So when you look at the bar chart, so the areas, so they go in order from north to south. So looking at 12 first, 19, 25, 31 is one of the attendance areas, but we don't have any students in that attendance area right now. 39 and then 44. So when we look at socioeconomic status, we want to look at are we creating any more disproportionality? Are we creating less? Is there an opportunity to even things out? Knowing that the Sherman feeder pattern, Sherman-Roth, has more socioeconomic need than the Vollmer and Berger feeder pattern. So when you take a look at area 12, you're going to see it represents, and this also gives you an idea of numbers for each of the attendance areas. So attendance area 12, which is the farthest north, it represents 46 students in total. So this is K-12, it's 46 students. And if you look at if there's any disproportionality, 24 students are considered not free and reduced lunch, and 22 are. So it's a very evenly split attendance area. Attendance zone 19 has 1 student right now, currently. Attendance area 25, again, has 5 students. So those middle 19, 25, and 31 are really more industrial in nature and very little housing. And then we get to area 39, which is getting more into the south towards the Berger, Vollmer, and the Leary. That represents 227 students. So now we're talking about a very large number of students, and when you look at that large number of students, 179 of them are not free and reduced lunch, and 48 of them are. So when you're thinking about that and potential for movement, there is potential there to help even out that disproportionality that we're seeing. So it's a flag to start looking at because it's an interesting attendance area. And then 44 is 76 students. 52 of them are not receiving free reduced lunch, and 24 of them are. So when you think about that first free and reduced lunch demographic factor, this is something to keep in mind as we're looking through and we're talking about the potential of these attendance areas.
So as we went through and took a look at, various combinations, what would happen if this area moved to this school? Or what would happen if these two areas were to shift to the other feeder pattern? We came up with 6 different options that had the potential to be possible paths to take along the way, either now or in the future.
One of the things I just want to point out as well, I did give you just as a reference on the back side of handout number 1, you should have the ethnic breakdown of the different areas. Again, this is just a reference, and the reason why I put that in there is I wanted to point out it's interesting when you look at your K-3 groups of students and you compare that as you go up into the grade levels for this current year. Again, we're just talking about this current year. You can see very quickly that the makeup of our younger students is much more diverse. If you just look at the K-3 bar charts, you're going to see many more colors, and you're going to see the blue color at the bottom is much less than the 10-12, which represents our white students. So I just highlight that to you as well, just as a reference point that our district is, as the years go, as the students come up through the grades, is becoming more and more diverse.
So option number 1 is to move all 6 areas from the Berger attendance zone to the Roth zone. So literally just shifting them over, okay? So when you look at option number 1 on handout number 2, if you look at the charts on handout number 2 and you take a look at, let's look at Leary and Winslow. If you notice the dark green, the actual numbers that we currently have with Leary at 464 and Winslow at 404, when you look at if we were to move them, what ends up happening is they just flip-flop, right? The numbers just flip-flop. So that's a problem when you're looking at that. If we move all 6 of them over, now the question becomes, are we just creating a problem in the other schools? It's not balancing the numbers, it's possibly just flip-flopping the current situation. And the same thing if you notice at Sherman and Vollmer, you'll see the same thing. It's just a flip-flop of the buildings if we move all 6. But those are the 6 that we were recommended to look at, so we wanted to look at that option first. What happens if we move all 6? So the next option is what would happen if we did not move 44th, so the farthest south attendance area, that one stayed with the Leary attendance zone and stayed Vollmer-Berger. So if you take a look at that, looking at the same schools, you'll see that there is some evening out, but there still is sort of a flip-flop. It doesn't even it out enough. So the next piece was we took a look at, okay, so we know that area 39 is the most populated of these attendance areas. So in that area, there's a baseball park in the middle of area 39, and there's a neighborhood north and there's a neighborhood south. So what would happen if we took and split 39 in half? So the neighborhood south of the park would stay with Leary, and what would happen if the 39 to the north of the park were to switch attendance zones with 12, 19, 25, and 31. And that third chart shows you, if you take a look at Leary and Winslow, look at what happens. And if you look at Sherman and Vollmer, look at what happens. They even out. If it was this year, the attendance would be quite even. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at Berger and Roth. They actually went a little bit more off, but again, we're talking about looking at years down the road. We're really not talking about this year. We looked at this data as if it was this year, and we moved the attendance zones, but by the time that we're looking at this, the kids will be moving, those students will have moved out to the high school.
Right, so we wouldn't, if you moved with option 3, you really wouldn't see as much effect on the Berger and Roth numbers for a few years until those kids moved up. So looking at other options, one of the options that the board could consider would be, instead of changing attendance areas at the K3 level, because as you know from the report, the K3 level right now does not have any issues with space, and we're not projecting any issues with space in the foreseeable future. We certainly have adequate space in all 4 of those buildings. Would it make sense to take a look at changing some of the attendance areas at 4th grade instead of K3? This option would need a little bit more study in terms of what the long-range impact would be on numbers, but you could pretty much assume, based on this year's numbers, based on the chart that Keena just reviewed, that we would expect to find more balance between Vollmer and Sherman and Berger and Roth than we currently have if you elected this option. But we would want to study that, get more information for the board first if you wanted to move in that direction. Another idea that came up at the committee but was not in the report would be to go back to something that we used to have to do when we only had 5 elementary schools feeding 2 middle schools, is that you may want to split and let some attendance areas feed both Vollmer and Sherman, where kids would split, kids in the same attendance area might split and go to different intermediates and eventually different junior high schools to try to maintain more of a balance in enrollment. There's a lot of factors with this too. We're going to be getting that new neighborhood going in with over 100 homes in the Sherman area, in the Sherman neighborhood, in fact, that's going to feed Sherman and Roth. So we're going to need to continue to revisit this issue as we update our projections every fall. And then we wanted to include a status quo option as well, because we know the board has a lot on its plate right now, and there may be other ways to manage the situation at Vollmer in the next few years without changing attendance areas right away. Because any change in attendance areas is not going to be immediate. You're going to need to study it, you're going to need to get input, you're going to make a decision, and then probably plan for, the year after the decision is made, so there's plenty of time to redraw transportation routes and for the schools to prepare and so forth. So the status quo option would be to postpone any changes to attendance areas for now and allow yourselves more time to study potential options and allow us to go into some of the data a little further to kind of look at the options that you might find more acceptable than others. And that would allow additional time to gather additional data as well, such as the survey that we discussed earlier. And what that would force would be for the buildings, especially Vollmer, to have to reallocate within the space that they currently have and the expected student population that they currently have, which would probably involve some consolidation of some of the uses of their current space. So some of the services that might currently have their own classrooms, for example, certain services might have to share room space, or perhaps the coaches move into a smaller space to free up a classroom, or you combine ESL space with another type of space, those types of things. And there are a lot of options. None of them would be ideal, because if you talk to the staff, you certainly would hear their argument for why it's important for those services to have their own space. But although it's not ideal, it would be possible and it would be manageable to get you through the next few years. I know that Superintendent Wright planned on talking about this further, because Keena and I really are not here to make recommendations for you. And I understand he had to leave the table. I know he's probably going to want to talk more about this when he has an opportunity with you, but I do believe that his thinking right now is, given everything that's on the board's plate, that you might want to consider option 6 at this point rather than take on attendance area changes in the immediate future. But obviously that's for the board to decide. Any questions or?
Pat, did you just say there's 100 new homes going in, or projected 100 new students for the Sherman attendance area? Did I catch?
It's not 100 new students, but there's a fairly large development that's going in south of Authors Avenue.
Off of Nevins Road.
Yep.
Yeah, off of Nevins Road, between there and the Thruway. And it's calling for about 100 homes according to the town planners. And it's expected to start construction. I'd have to look it back up in the report, but I believe it's in 23 that they're expecting. So we are expecting that to generate new students in the Sherman-Roth area.
Certainly a non-zero number coming out.
Correct,
as we develop.
correct. And we have formulas that we use to project the actual number of students,
Now-
at different grade levels.
Now, do I recall at some point in these conversations along the way that, because we talk about, the big data analysis that goes into enrollment projections and predicting, class sizes for kids that aren't even born yet. I get all of that. Do I recall correctly that there was some neighborhood that we had expected to go up that fell through for some reason? There was something with the developer. Was that?
Yes, that was the development off of Brighton-Henrietta Town Line Road called Winfield Park. And that was, it was right amidst the planning for the reconfiguration. Dr. Graham and I had met with the Brighton planners, and they, at that time, it was on the books to be a neighborhood of at least 300 single-family homes. It's a big parcel there that's all wooded right now, across from Allison and some of those industrial areas there on Town Line Road near Clinton. And that is Rush-Henrietta there. That's the outskirts of our district. And That was proposed by the Buckingham property, which is the Glazer family. And since the death of Mr. Glazer in that unfortunate airplane accident, the estate has been in probate, and their business has basically come to a halt. In fact, the last time I drove by there were for sale signs on that parcel. So the town of Brighton right now doesn't expect any building to be going on there in the near future. The problem for us was in the reconfiguration, we set aside space at Crane for that potential growth, and that, of course, would have fed Sherman as well. So part of our planning was predicated on that development, because that would have generated a significant number of students. So that's why you see now Crane being quite a bit smaller than the other three buildings. It was always going to be smaller just by virtue that it has fewer classrooms, and so it serves a smaller geographic area, but that was exacerbated by the fact that those homes were never built and the children never arrived. So that's another reason why the growth at Crane and Sherman and Roth has lagged the other attendance area.
So suffice it to say, despite, all of your work, all of Keena's work, all of the committee's work, the action or inaction on the part of real estate developers can throw all of this planning. It's like that, what is it, John Lennon line about life is what happens when you make other plans?
Yeah, that's exactly true. And that's what those are the variables you have to deal with enrollment planning. That's why I meet with the towns every year, especially Henrietta. That's why we do those projections every year, because things can change very quickly.
Right.
The trend started a few years ago in the Winslow and Crane area where a lot of the housing stock suddenly started to turn over, and you had young families with children moving in because the empty nesters were moving out. And a lot of the construction in the town is for empty nesters, 55 and over, townhomes and patio homes and so forth. So you've got to stay on top of those trends. There are so many variables that can affect the school district.
Well, and I think the reality is, we've, seen all the reports in the news about, the post-pandemic world and what it means for where people live and where people work. And, I saw something that said Rochester is the #1 destination in the Northeast, for people, post-pandemic working remotely. I have no idea if I'm remembering that correctly or if it's true, but my point is, it seems that there are a number of looming X factors that could, real estate development decisions change this entire landscape in not too long of a time frame.
And we've talked about that. It may end up changing the way we do our projections too. It may end up, may have to weight things a little bit differently than we have been.
We've talked about that at length, and that's one of the reasons why in sharing this data with you today, we intentionally only looked at if we moved them this year, this is what it would look like, because that's really the only true information that we have. So when we talk about the Sherman builds, we need to take that into consideration, because we wouldn't want, so with option number 1, and we see that flip-flop, and we could create unintentionally, the unintended consequence, create the same problem in another school. Right. That is a very real question. And so we have talked about that at length as to what does that look like, and that's why we wanted to start here with the real numbers to give us an anchor to start, and then be thinking about, okay, well, what does that look like? We already saw that last year with Space Committee with the holdbacks of our kindergartners, right? A lot of, right, they held them back. What homeschooling looked like, so we have to, it is a real conversation, and what next year is going to look like, we don't know yet.
You don't know yet. There's a certain amount of murkiness, and that murkiness probably increases exponentially as you go out another year and another year.
And now we have a housing market that is a seller's market, and so does building now become more attractive, right? So does that change the developments in the next few years, because that's really, the only option that we have, and it becomes more attractive to build. We don't know, but those are the conversations that Pat and I have quite frequently about how might we look at this differently next year as we get more information.
Yeah, it has the potential, and I certainly hope this doesn't happen, it has the potential to make the business of doing 5-year projections almost impossible to be with any kind of accuracy. And that puts school districts in a real tough bind, because if you get into a situation where your option becomes building more classrooms in a particular area, you need that kind of lead time just to get the thing designed, bonded, state-approved, and then the construction. I mean, that can take 5 years. So if we have to go to a 2 to 3 year horizon as our, reliable data source, that would put us in a big bind.
Any other questions or thoughts at this end? Did you have a question?
No, looking at this, I mean, I live in Area 39, and to try to cut it off or split it into like the ball fields and Seltzer where I live, I mean, there's kids that come over. I mean, I see different kids from Delaney come over to, I mean, I think that would cause so much upheaval and just discord from parents. I mean, I remember pre-reconfiguration, people from Rush Town Line Road passing Berger to get to Roth. I mean, I don't think parents want to, especially like in Area 39 and Area 40, wave at Vollmer when you're going to
Exactly.
go. And I think that there's so much, I took a drive around just because I knew this report was coming, and I'm looking at like Lehigh, all the apartments by Hosmer. I mean, that's all new. Then Nevins, if they get all these houses, I mean, it seems like there's so much unknown. And then who knows what next year's going to look like? Our kids going to want to stay remote, and I just think it's really difficult to try to make an option. And I mean, I think option 6 for me right now is the best one.
I agree.
We talked a little bit about that. Bo, did you want to add about option 6?
Yeah, that would be our recommendation, is to continue to study this. We're in a position where, if you grant us permission, we can make some adjustments based on what we're seeing in those buildings and on those grade levels where we have enrollment blips. We just don't think that this is the time to do anything drastic. And we think that we should just take some time to better understand the issues and further study it.
I would agree, because I've got some thoughts in my head about equity. I'm thinking about the equity for our staff and the burdens at the larger schools and having the resources to provide what we need for our students. And then, the equity of our students, making sure that the diversity, we're not just shoving kids here and there just for convenience. So I would like to have a lot more study on it to figure out the best option. When we did reconfiguration, we were hoping that we would not be in this place again, and here we are. And just moving those two pieces in the middle there, I'm still worried about all the growth that's over on the west side. It's just going to keep going. Is that moving just that little piece really going to be the thing that we need? So I think we need more looking at it. Go ahead.
I definitely think we need more, but I also want to make sure that we are ready to give the resources to Vollmer and Berger in the coming years, because they are going to have such a larger population than Sherman and Roth, and it's not fair to the guidance counselors and the other staff that there's one of them, one social worker, and they have over almost 200 more kids in a few years. So I want to make sure we're ready to pivot on that, and we can handle that financially to give them more resources.
Yeah, as we talked about during the budget development process, we always budget conservatively enough where we can respond to swings in enrollment. And that's one of our budgeting principles, is to make sure that we're budgeting equitably, meaning that buildings have what they need. I think the bigger concern is simply around the physical space, right? And so, but we're still in a position where if given permission, we would be able to make some slight adjustments and maneuver. But I think the bigger conversation is, if the trend continues, what's going to be the long-term solution, right? If you continue to see significant growth on the west side in certain buildings, and you're seeing a decline in enrollment in some of the other schools, then if you do nothing, then we could be in a situation where you're bursting at the seams in some buildings and have space all over the place in others. So that would be our recommendation, is that we study it further.
I mean, I'm hearing echoes of the conversation we just had about our athletic facilities and, the subdivision of the backyard of the high school into, however many different sections. That's almost the same conversation we're having now. It's like, okay, do we address this one thing in section S8? Or do we take a step back, take our time, and make sure we have a
Right.
comprehensive, long-range view to address a number of different issues to satisfy a number of different constituents?
Exactly.
I have a question. Wasn't Berger projected to get a larger enrollment? Because I thought when they did the addition that there's a foundation to build. Did you project?
Yes.
Did you
Berger-
saw?
Yeah, we've been this is my 8th space report, I think, and we've been projecting Berger to steadily increase right along. That really hasn't changed, and Berger, on paper, has the space. I mean, at some point, if it continues toward the end of the decade, they may need to add those 4 classrooms, and I see they're provided for even in the 5-year plan in case they're needed. But right now, they're going to have enough space. It's just going to get a little tighter. You might see teachers having to share classrooms and that type of thing. Instead of being able to stay in my room during my planning period, I have to go down the hall because another class is coming in, that type of thing. But Vollmer is where it's really going to be critical, we think. But we always knew, and that's why we added those 4 extra classrooms in the reconfiguration at Berger to allow for that growth. Yeah.
The only other thing I would add, and I'm sure that Pat and Keena touched on it while I was out of the room, is as we examine longer-term solutions, we have to be really thoughtful about if we do have to adjust attendance zones, because we also want to be cognizant of the impact that it could have from an equity standpoint, right? And so we have to take a thoughtful approach and take a balanced approach and keep that in mind as we are making those decisions, because those economic factors also impact our schools as well. And so that is an important part of the conversation.
All right. I can let Mrs. Sherman come to the microphone.
Thank you. One point and one question. So class enrollment size is going in the wrong direction lately with increases at the intermediate school, and with, I'm aware that students in hybrid coming back, some of those classes have really ballooned. So I'm just wondering if you will be reversing that, and that could have impact on your enrollment numbers as well. So to bring class sizes smaller, again, does that add an extra class at one or more of the schools? And then the question too, I'm hearing Mr. Wright ask for permission to make adjustments. I'm wondering if you could explain what adjustments you might have in mind.
Do you want to respond?
I can address the current enrollment if you want to address the second part.
Sure.
Well, we did have some unanticipated increases because of the hybrid and the remote programs. As we told the board at the semester break when we were redoing our staffing and our schedule, K-12, to accommodate parents who requested to go to the remote, we had another 100 plus moved to the remote program. At that time, we did the staffing completely over again at the elementary level. And all sections at the RLA, as well as the 6 elementary schools, were restaffed to be within the board guidelines with regard to class size. What happened, and it's mainly at Sherman, and it's about 3 or 4 classrooms at Sherman, was that because of unexpected moves, unexpected new entrants since the start of second semester, and people coming back from the RLA, we do have 3 or 4 sections that are above the board guideline or the maximum in the board guideline of 23. But going forward, as we always do, we staff strictly to the board guidelines, and that's exactly the plan we have in place this fall, and that will have no impact on numbers of sections or space beyond what was projected in the Space Committee report.
So to answer the second part of that question, the choice that's before us, it could potentially be that either you have to redraw attendance boundaries, or we would have to, in the interim, if we're saying, let's study this further, a slight adjustment might be that if you experience an enrollment blip, say at Vollmer, that we would have to ask permission for you to allow us, say on a certain grade level, to nudge that class size. So yes, we may be in a position where we would have to ask permission for a one-year period to adjust class size. Like I said, the alternative would be that we would have to take a more drastic approach. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I would just say, as we said earlier, that there are ways right now based on we do an audit of elementary space every couple of years. Based on the way that the space is being utilized in those buildings right now, they've got some luxuries built in there. They've got separate classrooms for some services that service small numbers of students that can easily be consolidated. We have a couple classrooms being used for conferencing and coaching meetings and things like that can be moved into much smaller spaces to allow those classroom spaces to be used as classrooms. So, Vollmer will be tight for those 2 to 3 years, but with some adjustments and potentially with potential temporary exemptions from the class size guidelines, if it comes to that, we can definitely get them through it without redrawing attendance boundaries.
And when we say, yeah, and that would be probably, when we talk about making a slight adjustment, that would probably, what Pat described, that would probably be most ideal, being able to maneuver within the physical space in the building as opposed to nudging class sizes. But when we talk about a nudge, we're literally talking by a student or two, so that you would still be probably underneath the county average or right at the county average and still within an acceptable range of probably 24 students or less.
Yep, I did a quick analysis of that based on the projections for the next 3 or 4 years, particularly at Vollmer, and if you chose that route, just by nudging the class size max to 24, you would have plenty of space.
So that's just something to consider. But as Pat said, we may be able to make some adjustments without adjusting class sizes.
Correct.
So it sounds like we need to dig a little deeper into this before we make any drastic changes to any attendance zones, because that is never a fun trip. All right, any other questions from the board? All right, I guess that we can say thank you for the information. It's a lot for us to be thinking about in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This brings us to one of our favorite activities. And it brings us to district policy, regulations, and exhibits. I am not going to rush us, but I'm not going to dilly-dally either, so we'll start with section 1, which is support services. I'll read the number as I usually do, because I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing to my right. If you have something, really holler out so I don't miss you, okay?
No problem. Will do.
Thank you. All right, we'll start with 8136.
I did submit an email prior to the last meeting, so I don't know if anybody has that with them, but 8136 is just capitalized the surveillance in the title. It's just a typo.
Great, thank you. 8200. There's some spacing in there near the last paragraph, but I think I can give that to you, Karen.
Thank you.
8212.
It is possible to add a phrase at the end of the asterisk, the double asterisk, indicating that the monetary amount is for misdemeanor and it can go up to $25,000 for a felony offense if you choose to add that information. It's not really part of the policy, it's just informational.
It's always good to have extra information for everybody.
And I have a his, her in the second paragraph, on the right-hand side, the third line from the bottom of that paragraph.
Okay.
Would those be minor, Diane, or first read?
I'm sorry?
Would those be minor or first read?
I think they're all minor.
Agreed.
First read. Anything else on that one? All right. 8410? 8411, I think George had something.
I had a suggestion under, I can't remember where it is now, transportation to daycare provider, where it talks about in case of shared custody, and then the policy kind of labels one of the parents a daycare provider. Those can be touchy circumstances. I don't know how that phrasing is actually used, but my suggestion was to simply give them each a stop and not try to make one of them a custodial parent and one a non-custodial parent.
Why don't we send this one to policy? We can kind of hash it out a little bit. I like the suggestion about not stigmatizing, so yeah, let's send that to policy. And 8411-R.
Just a typo in the first bullet. Should be at rather than beat the intersections.
Yep.
And then I have, hold on, I gotta find out what page, 1, 2, third page, at the bottom, expectations at bus stops should be parents/guardians.
And I also observed that on the second page, under district map, it should be a reference to map rather than plural.
Oh.
George, where are you again?
He is under district map on the second page, I believe.
Okay.
And sorry, I have another, a he, she on page 2, the third bullet, the he, she in the last line. I'm sorry, second to last line. Did you find it, Karen?
On the second page?
No, the second page, the third bullet, second to last line in that.
That starts with thereafter?
In the time a bus driver does not feel it's safe to drop off a student, he, she shall contact the dispatcher.
We're still on 8411R, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So it says, one bullet says an accident, the second is the president of,
Oh, at the very top, I'm sorry. Okay.
No.
Okay, anything else on that one?
I have a couple more he, she's, but I can just email them to her.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I have a couple more he, she's, but I can just email.
That'd be
to her.
great. Those would all be minor.
And just spacing here, where, I think where it says schedule change requests out of district schools, that should start at the top of the next page.
Well, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it in board docs.
Okay.
We love that.
Gift that keeps on giving.
All right. Any others with that regulation? Exhibit E1, E.1. E.2. 8412. 8412-R. 8412E. 8413. 8414.
Hold on, I have a question mark. I just got to figure out why.
Which one?
Is it the third paragraph?
Which policy?
8414. Such instruction. Oh, yeah, I had a question about that. Is the instruction and the conduct of the drill shall be given by a member of the teaching or student transportation staff? What is that? Is it like a teacher actually doing it, or how is that working?
Do you want to take that one, Andy?
Yeah, usually it is somebody from the transportation department, but if they're very young kids, the teacher might help.
Okay.
But it's generally led by somebody from the transportation department.
Got it, thank you.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. 8414.4. 8414.4-R, 8414.5, 8414.5-R,
I had a couple of things under 17C, which is on the third page. Delete the word time after driving, because it's all time spent driving time, and so it's redundant or unnecessary. And under Roman numeral 4, which is on the next page, I think that the number 2 should be moved up as a letter subparagraph under number 1, and that should be renumbered. That's my suggestion anyway, because it's prohibiting drivers from, and then number 2 is drivers are also prohibited, so it really falls more naturally under 1 as just another item.
So make that paragraph I, George,
Yes, then that would be I.
and then 3 would become 2, and
Right.
and 4 would become 3, yep. Anything else on that one? Are you,
Then I think that there's confusion between using letters and Roman numerals in under Roman numeral 5. It needs to just be coordinated. Because if you go down to 3, you see 5.1, and then you've got little Roman numerals. And under Roman numeral 5, then 2, it says section 5.1.1, but I think it should be 5.1.B. Again, it's the parent going from paragraphing or letters to numbers. The very last, you look on under 5, number 2, the very bottom of the page, it says, with respect to section 5.1.1 above. I think that should be 5.1.B.
and he's also
Or A,
talking about 3.
I'm sorry, A, not B, A, rather than 1. And then under number 3, as I said, you've got the little Roman numerals instead of the letters.
How about if we take this to policy to have just a more time to look at it? I understand what he's saying, but we might need to go back to refer to something.
Okay, then if it's going, then they should also just look at changing the word companies in Roman numeral 7, 1A to districts instead of companies.
All right, Pat?
so you want to take that to policy?
Yeah, let's just make sure those letters and numerals are all in the right place, and if there's some place that you need to reference, make sure we have it correct.
Will do.
Okay. 8414.6. 8414.6-R. 8416. 8417. 8500. George had a comment.
I had a suggestion for the first sentence to change, so it would read, my proposal would be, the Board of Education recognizes that school cafeterias are essential to the total school program. I think that's the intent of the sentence, but I think as it reads, it doesn't really make that point, where it just says they are a part of the total school program.
Is everyone good with that, the essential?
Are essential to,
They're an essential part of the total. Okay,
Minor, Diane, or first read? Minor?
it's minor. Okay, ready to move on? 8505. 8505-R. 8520. 8520.1.
Andy has suggested that we might want to review this at policy, the existence of this whole policy, because it really has not been used in years. We don't really have a senior lunch program anymore. No one has taken advantage of it long before the pandemic. And with the heightened security in school buildings and having strangers in there, it really is kind of moot. So he suggested that policy maybe review it to possibly delete it.
All right, so it goes to policy. 8540. 8540-R. 8635, I think, George,
8635.
yes.
The breach needs to be capitalized in the title. I had that renumbered on my email, misnumbered as 8638.
Okay. And is this the same one that you wanted to refer to policy to coordinate?
He asked that the regulation go to policy, so we should probably pull the policy as well.
Okay.
George, do you want to talk about why?
Was this the one about education law concerning data privacy and parental bill of rights? Is that what,
I'm sorry.
this 8635 going to policy?
Yeah, 8635 needs to go to policy, I think, to catch up with a lot of new legislation having to do with parental bill of rights and data protection is kind of involved. So I think it needs to be looked at globally.
Do you have language for that, George? Do you have language that you could share for that?
Do you have language for it?
What? I'm sorry.
Do you have language that we can use?
Well, I can send you a lot of material on it. There are some templates from SED and everything about governmental policies.
Okay.
It's fairly involved. Yes, I have a bunch of stuff I can send you.
Great.
SED provided a lot of templates for policy and postings on the website and that kind of thing.
Let's send the regulation with it as well to make sure it's all cohesive. So that's 8635 and 8635-R.
Yep.
8700. Okay. Brings us to the next section. 9110.4.
I have several his or her, but I'll email Karen.
Okay. Okay. All right. Are you good there, George? I don't know if that was where you had some.
I had a couple of minor things too, which I
Okay,
think are just
perfect.
more- they're really just formatting and a typo.
Okay. 9110.4-R.
I have more his or her, and I'll email her.
Okay. 9120.1. 9125. 9160. I'll slow down as Nikki's trying to turn pages. Do you have any?
I just have one his or her, and this one on number 5, the first sentence.
Nikki, which one are you on?
9160,
Okay.
number 5, first sentence, his or her, his/her.
9160?
R.
60R, thank you.
Can we go back to 9125? I apologize.
Sure. No problem.
It's just a minor wording thing in the very first sentence. Wrongful conduct is occurring within the school district. I would suggest we change is to disclose to must disclose.
Which number, I'm sorry?
9125.
Let's make that a first read, because I feel like that changes it just a little bit in strength, so we should.
You think so?
Yeah, just a little bit in strength. Thank you. Anything else on that one? Okay, anything else on 9160? We're good there? 9211.
I think we need to change the last sentence in the second paragraph, just to be clear. It says salary increases are decided in negotiations with employee unions. Typically, what we'll say is salary increases are determined by collective bargaining agreements.
Let's send that to policy,
Okay.
please. Do we want to send the regulation just to make sure it matches,
Yeah, I've got a couple wording changes for
Okay,
that, too.
so let's, the regulation 9211-R, will go with it as well.
Yep.
I always like to make sure they align. 9230,
This one, NISBA has provided some updates for equity and inclusion, so there's new language, so I've drafted those changes for policy.
so we'll go to policy.
Yep.
Great. 9250, 9260, 9260-R.
There is one his or her in the paragraph under teachers, the fourth line down, probationary teacher in his, her building.
Okay,
I think, Diane, there's some changes that we might want to consider, just to update this. It's a little out of date with the 4-year probationary period and so forth, so we might want to bring this to policy.
all right, policy then. 9301,
Diane, do we need the policy to go with 9260R?
yes, we could do that. I think it'll be all right, but 9260 will go with 9260R just to make sure. All right. 9301,
Nerland has asked that we consider some changes to this that she's drafting, just because all our procedures around TIG are different than they used to be.
all right, so we want to send 9301 to policy then. And that brings us to 9310.
I have a couple his or her, but I'll
Okay.
give them to Karen.
Okay, maybe Nikki has this. Under medical examinations, the first line, strike the word must because it's redundant with requires all persons, so the must is redundant. And in the second to last paragraph on the page, I think disqualifications should be singular, not plural.
Okay. Consider those minor. 9320. 9460, looks like he had a spacing.
On 9460, Diane?
9460, yeah, there was a spacing in the fifth bullet. Publication in a newsletter needs a space in there. 9520.2.
This one here should, the serious, under medical, number 2, medical leave, the second bullet, the serious health condition of employee spouse, son, daughter, I think it should say child instead of son, daughter.
Are you on the regulation?
Oh, I'm sorry, I am. My apologies.
I was like,
I skipped a page.
so it's 9520.2 we're on. All right, 9520.2-R.
That's where my change was.
My suggestion was under family leave where it says birth and postnatal care of their child, I think it should be the employee's child. Just to be consistent with the rest of the policy.
Okay.
George, it was birth and postnatal care of the employee's child?
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's my suggestion, rather than their child.
And what was your change, Nikki?
The employees, I don't know what Nikki,
In the number 2, medically, the second bullet, it says the serious health condition of employee spouse, child, or parent instead of son, daughter.
keeps it
And then
consistent.
I also have that same thing in number 3. There's 2 different sections. In both bullets, there's a son and daughter.
Mhm. All right, anything else on that one?
Are those minor or first read?
Yeah, they're minor enough, they're changing language to be consistent with other policies. 9520.3,
I have a his or her, his/her in the 3rd bullet, first sentence.
okay. Anything else on that one? 9531,
I found in this, let's see, under therefore, the second bullet, in the second line of that says being paid by the district in any for mother. I think it's supposed to be form other than.
I caught that one too. It's not from
Okay, you
other.
did better than my comment was. I couldn't figure out what it was supposed to
It took me a while.
form other than, so it's form. Oh,
Yeah.
gee, that-
Form other.
Okay.
Yeah.
little
Well,
spacing
that does make
issue.
more sense. then.
All right. 9605, 9645. Can't get the page. turned.
Oh, I have a couple of his or her, and I'll give them to Karen.
Perfect, thank you. 9700.
I think on
Ooh,
the,
ooh.
I'm sorry, on the second page, under complaints of reprisal,
Yes,
it might be clearer if, where it says the board prohibits any retaliatory behavior directed against those individuals, I think we should insert behavior by district officials or employees.
can we take that to policy, just?
Sure.
Do you want me to give my changes to Pat rather than Karen then?
Okay. It gives me time to read it a little bit better. All right. 9700.
This is another one that NISBA's recommending some changes for
Okay.
equity and inclusion.
So policy is going to be a little busy.
Yep.
9720.
I have several his or her, and I'll give them to Karen.
Okay, great. 9720-R.
I would change copyrighted in paragraph number 2 to copyrightable. And that's actually true in the second line too, where it says copyrighted and patentable materials. Copyrightable is actually a word, and it refers to something in process rather than something that has been
Right.
copyrighted.
I have some his/her, and I'll give them to Karen.
Okay. I think that's minor, so we'll. 8110.3. That concludes our triannual review. It was great bedtime reading. All right, this brings us, believe it or not, to the superintendent's report.
There were no written reports submitted for review, just a couple of oral reminders. Not so much reminders, updates, I suppose. We have started with K-6, 4-day week, in-person instruction, and I want to thank everyone who made that possible, from our teachers to staff members, administrators, the board, for your support and for the flexibility, patience, and support that our families gave us throughout the year. This table's plastic, it's not wood, but I'll knock on it anyway. It's been smooth thus far. We did have some minor issues around traffic flow in those first 4 days in certain buildings where we anticipated it, Leary being one of them. but we did receive support from Mike Palladino out of our safety office and from the Monroe County Sheriff's Department, and we were thankful for that help. Those issues have sort of smoothed out as time has gone on, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. And then had some minor issues that very first day at file, which those got smoothed out. Thank you to our transportation department. They sent folks over to help direct traffic and whatnot, which helped greatly. The other thing that it remains an issue. It's a little bit better than it was during those first couple of days, but we just have to remind parents to complete the screener. As I was visiting schools that first day, still have a significant number of families not completing the screener, and then that places an extra burden on the school because when the child gets there, we're required to screen them ourselves. So we're looking to streamline that process so that it doesn't take a significant number of staff members and a lot of time, but it works a whole lot better if families screen at home. So this is my reminder to families to do that. But so far, so good with K-6. 7-12, we still are not in a position where the guidance allows us to bring students back. We sit in a red zone. We're still over 200 cases per 100,000 here in Monroe County. That number needs to be at 100 or less in order for us to move into the orange zone. So we're quickly running out of time. The county did make some adjustments to a cohorting model that they think might help some school districts in grades 7 and 8. But I think generally speaking, moderate to larger size districts would really struggle there because of the cohorting model that they're suggesting. They want to keep students within groups of 100. So in a district like ours, say take Berger, for example, there is really no feasible way to cohort them in that way. We also have a junior high school model where you have grades 7 through 9, so you have 9th graders in that building. It's not like a classic middle school 6-8 model. So there's a lot of co-seating of classes, especially in grades 8 and 9. And, in our situation, you would have to completely blow up their schedule to gain essentially probably 5 or 6 weeks of in-person instruction. And so I don't think that would help us. And I think quite honestly, even though I'm grateful that they're trying to make those adjustments, I think for most schools in Monroe County, it's not going to be doable. But that's just for grades 7 and 8, those cohorting adjustments that have been suggested, and we did have some conversation about that at our superintendent's meeting today. But generally speaking, looking at trying to get secondary students back, it's going to be really difficult. And the last time we were at this table, we said, the 7th is sort of the date that, we're looking at it. If you get beyond there, questioning, does it make sense to do that? So right now we're planning with that date in mind, which means this week we're keeping a very watchful eye on those numbers because I think next week we have to come out and notify families. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying to you is, and we can certainly, we can extend beyond the 7th if you felt like that's what you want to do. But what I'm hearing more from families now is just tell us. It's not so much about getting kids back to school at this point in the year at all costs when it comes to older students. It's just let us know so that we can plan. So at this stage, the numbers aren't looking good. We haven't completely ruled it out, but like I said, we're more than double the numbers that we need in terms of infection rates. And so we're quickly running out of time. And so that's where we are when it comes to secondary. I'd love to bring them back, but I just don't know that it's going to be feasible given where we are with the numbers in Monroe County and what we have left in terms of time. So I open it up for comments and questions. But that's where our focus is right now is trying to take care of the elementary students that are back, trying to look at the feasibility of getting secondary back, and if we can't do that, looking at targeted opportunities to bring students back together in person where we can, especially for our seniors. That's where we are.
Unfortunate, but
And on a positive note, just to piggyback on what we talked about at our last meeting, this ended up being a really, really good budget cycle for us. So we're pleased to be in a position where we are positioned really well in September to reopen schools and support students. There'll be some opportunities, hopefully, that we can support students this summer, certainly looking ahead to intervening and enriching accordingly this fall. And we're able to do that and still keep the tax rate flat. So we'll by far be, the lowest in the county as far as tax rate goes. Kudos to Andy and his team. Kudos to the board for your foresight and setting this up. But I've been doing this a while now, and this is by far the best budget that I've ever been able to present to a community. So that's a good place to be. That concludes the report.
all right. Any questions? All right, we'll move to new business. We were given the proposed calendar dates for our next board meetings next year. Any concerns with those? Yes, Mrs.
I just wanted to let everyone know, if the dates in November, I went with the 2nd and 4th like we normally had, but depending on the Thanksgiving break, if you wanted to do the 1st and the 3rd, we could change those. So just take a look and then let me know.
Okay.
And the meeting in February is break week. We've had our meetings that week before, but I just didn't know what everyone's plans were.
And we've done that in November, had it on the 2nd and 4th. We did it this
Correct.
current year, so.
Yes, we have.
Any concerns with those dates? Anybody want to revisit that, or? Nope. All right. The other item under new business was the board budget quarterly report. Seeing we're not going to any conferences, there's very minimal activity. There's just been a few Monroe County School Board Association events. Any questions or concerns on our budget? All right. Seeing none, that brings us to board member reports.
All right, just because it's late and I'm really tired now, and for information exchange, those of us who are on Zoom got kicked out several times, and we had a hard time getting signed in the beginning. I believe I forwarded you the minutes to it, but it was for superintendents that talked about culturally responsive sustaining education framework. And like I said, I was in and out of it, but I did forward the minutes, so I guess
Thank you.
the easiest way.
District Safety Committee.
All right, I couldn't read my notes, but I did print out Mike's, so. Let's see, it was a nice meeting, straight to the point, which is really nice. Ken Nelson reported the same thing I think I mentioned before with wellness, is that they're continuing to test for lead as mandated. They updated the district public authorities list, and will also update the extended safety plan and distribute it to all first responders. And the district exposure and infection control manual is being reviewed for any new additions. Shirley reported there was concerns on how, this of course happened before school started, but concerns about increased traffic for Leary and Winslow, and the sheriff's department was going to be assisting there. And over by Winslow, I believe it was, they had some extra crossing guards, if I remember them. saying that. And then Mike Palladino was going to be there to help direct traffic as well. And for Geraldo, he said the CDC is advising that students will not be able to eat in classrooms. Of course, I know they started since then. And they require the district cleaners, that requires the district cleaners to clean and sanitize the lunchroom tables twice a day. The breakfast numbers continue to be low, even with school allowing free meals for all. And summer feeding will continue at both locations, like we mentioned last time, at Riverton and the senior high school from July 6th through August 13th. 10 a.m. to noon every day. And from Diane and Wellness and Equity, she said, at this point, we were still working on the Code of Conduct Committee. They're updating that, and we'll distribute that shortly for us to review. And working with the buildings and their mental health staff to make sure there's support for students and staff when they return. Of course, like I said, that happened beforehand, so we do have, she does a great job. And then Travis reported the e-news update on reopening will continue to be sent out as usual. And Sharon Harris reported on that they're still allowing district staff to get tested at the top on Wednesdays, and that there's been an increase in positive cases in the sports teams, requiring more people to be quarantined. And then the last thing was from Mike Palladino, and he said they're working on getting all the health and safety items ready for next school year, and for those of us on the committee, if there's any other additions to be made to that, to send them in shortly. And that was it.
Thank you. Next up is Henrietta Youth Asset Team.
That's me. I did not get an update. I called Anita because I'm not getting the Zoom links. I did not attend.
Next up then would be Upstate Institute.
I went to that meeting today at noontime. Today we actually changed our bylaws so that an individual can be appointed by a member board. It doesn't have to be a board member anymore because they're having difficulty of the member boards getting people to come at noontime, I think. The main one was from Brighton, so he's actually going to sit for the next 3 years. And then my seat has been extended for a 3-year term. It depends on if we want me to stay or reappoint someone else, but that seat is open for the next 3 years. And if you have any suggestions for topics for board training, we have not been able to do it the past couple years, and we would like to do something in the fall. So if you have any suggestions we're hoping possibly in person in the fall, but any suggestions for board training?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. This brings us, if there's nothing else for our meeting, to board recap.
All right, let's see if I can read my writing again. So all consent agenda items passed, personnel actions were approved. We need to make some decisions regarding turf and the Good Shepherd project in the next few months. We approved a 3- and 5-year-old capital improvement, 3- and 5-year capital improvement plan. And we are going to continue to look at the space committee information to allow for a sound decision. We have several policies, I think if I counted 13, that are going to our wonderful policy committee. And then our next meeting is May 4th.
All right.
I'd like to collect a signature from everybody on the deed for the town transaction, so just take a second don't leave until I grab your signature.
Okay. All right, then I will take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Moved.
James and Nikki, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you all.